Thank you for joining us for the Miller Upton Forum at Beloit College, hosted by the Department of Economics and Business. My name is Laura Grube, and I hold the Albert Neese Chair in Economics, which means that I have the distinct honor to lead the Upton Forum. The forum is named after the 6th president of Beloit College, Miller Upton, who was also an economist by training. He was an advocate for the ideals of the liberal society, which include political freedom, the rule of law, and the promotion of peace and prosperity through the voluntary exchange of goods, services, and ideas. This forum is designed to advance student understanding of the nature and causes of wealth and well-being. This year is the 16th annual Upton Forum, and I am delighted to welcome our scholar, David Aldrich. So David Aldrich is a distinguished professor in the Emeritech Chair of Economic Development at Indiana University, where he also serves as the director for the Institute of Development Strategies. Professor Aldrich's research focuses on entrepreneurship, government policy, and economic development. In particular, he's interested in the varied experiences of regions and cities over the last century, as we've seen processes of industrialization, deindustrialization, and what might be referred to as the emergence of the knowledge economy. Today, we are gathered to hear from Oakleigh Ryan, a businesswoman, entrepreneur, and leader of community development in her city of Janesville, Wisconsin. I want to thank Oakleigh for accepting our invitation and really diving into this project. She carefully studied Professor Aldrich's framework for the strategic management of place. In fact, I see that she has the copy of his book and has already asked him to sign it. So thank you, Oakleigh. Oakleigh received her undergraduate degree in international relations from Stanford University, where she also played on the women's soccer team. Any shout outs for any soccer players in the room? She has an MBA from Harvard. She met her husband, Tobin Ryan, while she was at Harvard. Oakleigh served as knowledge management leader for Studer Group, a consulting firm that was an early pioneer in evidence-based leadership. She then went on to be vice president for service excellence at a multi-hospital network with over 16,000 employees. I said that she is an entrepreneur. She is the founding principal of Whiton House, a boutique management consultancy and engagement institute. Just recently, she served as interim CEO for Forward Janesville, an organization that leads private sector economic and community development efforts in Janesville and Rock County. Please join me in welcoming Oakleigh Ryan.
Wow, she is hired as my agent. This is so fun. So glad to be here today. So glad to have Supra. Where's Supra? My AV guy, thank you. I told them, there's a Dell up here. I've been on a Mac since I was 18 years old, so I don't, these 3 fingers and all this stuff. So hopefully bear with me, we'll get through it. Yes, Professor Aldrich, I read your entire book, which is more than I could say I did in college. It was when I got the invitation, thanks to my friend Brandon Miles. Brandon, where are you? There you are. You're so lucky to have him. He was an amazing professor, teacher at Craig High School in Janesville. My son had him, and he's here at Beloit College. We still have him doing things in Janesville, so we're lucky to be here. And I even have one of my colleagues, Dave Hiller, past chair of Forward Janesville, just got the past president award last night. We had our annual dinner, and if you guys have ever shipped anything overnight or gotten a package from your parents, you might have used FedEx. Well, last night it was really cool. Laura got to join us, her husband, Fred Smith, the founder CEO of FedEx, was our speaker, and it was a tour de force. When he was talking about business, you would have loved to have been there, Professor Aldrich. Oh my gosh. When in the same time you're talking about delivering, I think it's what he said, $2 trillion like a day or a year. I mean, it's crazy what they move. 200 countries, and then he quotes Marcus Aurelius from the Roman Empire. Like, you know you're in for a fun time. So it was really great to be here, and Dave was our chair. Dave and I are in that select group of what I call anonymous community builders. We can't help ourselves. It probably gets us out of our day job, and it's been a lot of fun. And I'll tell you a little more about my background. But we are mainly here to educate our youth, right? So how many Beloit College students do I have? Raise your hand. Whoa, that's amazing. So I gotta ask you, they say there's no such thing as a free lunch, but there was free lunch, wasn't there? Anyway. All right, well, to keep you all engaged too, because I think we have time for question and answer. I've got about 40 minutes of remarks. It may shorter, a little more, but we've got time for remarks. And for my Beloit College students, I don't know who of you, it's competitive, but we are talking about place, right? And as I'll mention shortly, I think viewing places from different perspectives enhances our understanding of it. So I have here a free 30-minute flight for one out of the Rock County Southwestern, it's a fancy name, airport for you and an instructor to fly. So you get it, I get to pick you based on your questions and engagement. All right, so there we go. And tell your parents it's all safe. So let's jump right into it. So what are we gonna do this afternoon? 3 parts to the conversation. Most importantly, we want to look at and understand at a high level one of the many works from Professor Aldrich, but his work, Everything in Its Place. And that then I'm going to use as a lens to examine my own city, Janesville, Wisconsin, and to test his theory. And then we're in an academic environment. We've got to, challenge each other in the liberal ideal. And so we'll draw some conclusions, hopefully from the case study, and apply them to Professor Aldrich's work. We'll engage in some conversation, and then we've got Q&A. How does that sound? Is that good? All right, sounds good. And if you get dozy, eat some chocolate chip cookies. So knowing something about place. I mean, I was asked to be here, so I just want to give you a little of my credentials. These 3 pictures tell a good story. The one on the left are my mom and dad, Bill and Dana McKelvey. Before I was the age of 7, lived in 18 places. 18 places. And no, we were not being kicked or running from the law. And my dad was in the Army. He was a 66 graduate, Vietnam War, so he enlisted, but he went to officer candidate school. And this is them. My mom was pregnant with my brother, so he was born 67. So she's 22 years old with my dad. They're very dressed up. Fitting of the occasion, and that structure to the left is the trailer park that we lived in. And there was a sweet neighbor who babysat me. So 18 places, and one of the places you write a lot about Germany was Ulm, Arizona, twice in Alabama, Virginia, Fort Belvoir. But they say the brain, most important development is 0 to 5. And so I can only imagine what was going through my brain. And I have certain images that are stuck in my brain. But so I know a little about place. So my dad was very lucky after the Vietnam War, was able to get a position very lucky. He was working for a fly-by-night, unscrupulous cargo carrier that had to have 2 logs. One was the real weight, one was the weight that would get past the FAA. Not a good place to be. And someone said there was a company that was hiring pilots, and he had the right flight, airplane requirements, and it was called FedEx, and it was 1974. And so we packed up, went down to Memphis, a little foreign for us. We had not spent that much time in the South, and bought a house with a GI Bill, another interesting policy that we'll talk about in terms of when you drive economic performance. The house was $26,000 on Meyer Drive. My husband keeps saying the more I talk about it, it keeps shrinking in size. But my grandfather called it the sideways house because it was like 950 square feet, and you had to go sideways on the hallway. But the picture in the middle is my dad pretty early decided that we needed a plane. So you can imagine, my mom's like, we have 1 bathroom and you want to buy a plane. And so he got this old Bonanza detail and for 27. So our plane was more than our house. But that was our station wagon. In fact, I arrived in college in that plane, and I went to college in California, as was mentioned, and you had to stop in Denver to get gas, and he told me that there were some things I couldn't bring. We'd have to ship them because the weight was too much. And so I spent my life kind of really 10 on dropping into places that most people wouldn't go, but there was an airport and we would take trips. So it was just all these things. When you're at this age as a college student, things are happening to you that will become relevant and reveal itself later on. So my recommendation to you now is enjoy the journey, take different chances, because they will show up later. And for me, showing up later did happen, not too much further, but that's our house on the right. And that house, my husband and I came back to work on a campaign in 1998, and we were living in London, and I was in charge of helping find volunteers. I think I went to every county fair in the 1st District of Wisconsin. I met a lot of people, and my husband grew up 2 blocks from this house. Had never thought he'd be back to Janesville, right? And was with a consulting, and I saw a for sale sign at this house. And we were living in London. I was like, oh, I bet that's really expensive. It was $180,000. And I had a leaky roof. And we walked into it, and we said, we're not going back to London. We don't have jobs, therefore. But you know what? Let's buy this house. And so we did that in 1999. And it was built by Edward Whiton. If you ever go to the state capitol, first Supreme Court Justice of the state of Wisconsin. He was a cool dude. He came out in the 1830s from Western New York and wanted to be part of the Northwest Territory and founding land. And so this house is part of our family. And being an Army brat, living in all these places, I walked in and I really said, I have a sense of place. And so I have been looking at a sense of place, really unintentionally. More intentionally, I worked for 8-9 years, traveled a lot, but then about 8 or 9 years ago, some of us in Janesville really started getting serious about place, right, Dave? And had fun. So it's my hometown. I'm not from there, but I love it. And when I founded Whiton House, I don't know if it was prescient, but I founded it in 2009. And I now tell people I'm really good at working for free. But when I founded it, I haven't changed my website. And I said the principles that affect our leadership, humans, that affect our businesses are the same ones that are affecting our community. And we can look at them through the same lens. So kind of an interesting humanistic perspective of placemaking. So that's a little about me. Now, the more important thing, Professor Audret's work, and I apologize if I don't get it right, my interpretation. When I read his book, it really hit me right away because of my own experiences. And you are a creature of your past, your background, your studies, right? And so what I've described in my background is looking through things through different lenses, right? And I love specialization, and I love people who dig deep, right? And I say I'm more the other. I want to have a little of everything, and I want to understand that. And so when I started reading his book, I started seeing what was unfolding was this holistic framework of really placemaking and helping communities, cities, states, regions get better. Milton Friedman, he talks about the world is flat. And when he says that, up until maybe the last 50 or 60 years ago, the premise was, and I love this, is what was good for GM was good for Detroit. Meaning a place was really defined by the firm that was in it, right? And so when the world becomes flat, right? I mean, how many of you have gotten a FedEx or an Amazon package recently? How many of you think that it's probably not built in Wisconsin or made in Wisconsin? Maybe outside the United States? And do some of these things take like 2 days or a day to get you? I still freak out when I order Amazon and it shows up 2 hours later, like as someone waiting behind a tree to drop this off. The world is so flat, right? And so something that is good for the company, right, to offshore, to manufacture somewhere else, may have implications for the community. So it's no longer linked what is good for the company may not be good for the community. And so it really started flipping on its head this whole notion of get great companies, and if you build great companies, the founders, the CEOs will take care of the community. I love this word, and that's why we learned so much. I think you said, President, that there's 26 countries represented at Beloit College. Like, that is so cool, all these different perspectives. But one of the works, the word that Professor Aldrich mentions is Standardpolitik? Kind of, thank you. Hablo español, no, German. But it's about the policy of place, and you don't have that word in English. And I think there's a reason for that because of the way our country was founded. It was very individualistic. And so it's about flexibility, uniqueness. You should have a policy for place. But then he raises the question, well, if you need to have a policy for a city, a region, a community, whose responsibility is it? Whose responsibility do you think it is for Beloit to be the best community it can be? Who do you think? Whose responsibility? Throw it out there. The community? The community people. We, right? Not the government, not just industry, right? And so when you start throwing all these different stakeholders into it, that's beautiful, but it's messy. Right? Because, I mean, you've been in a situation where you're in a group of people and something has to be done and you realize there's no leader, right? And it can be chaotic. I mean, accountability drives results. So all of a sudden, the policy of place, who's responsible for it? And he explores that. So in looking at how communities can get better, improve their economic performance, there are many people who have studied this, and we're going to briefly go through some of those. And what's so beautiful about this work is that he calls upon these different experts, specialists, academics, and weaves them together. And I have spent enough time coaching organizations where I have seen the whack-a-mole game. Do you know the whack-a-mole? Right? I don't know, sometimes I say things and I'm giving my age. You hit it here and it pops up here, right? It's a county fair game. Whack-a-mole happens all the time in the world. And whack-a-mole in businesses, in communities, is people chase the next best thing because everyone else is doing it, right? I mean, I'm sure for the students here, how many times have your parents, caregivers said, don't just do it because everyone else is doing it. But guess what? Adults don't follow that, right? And so if you go to any town now, everyone's throwing up signs, we've got a great historic downtown. Not because they really studied that, because everyone else has one. And what I love about his work, this framework, is he prevents you from chasing the shiny bauble, because he gives it all to you in a framework and will encourage you as the community who's responsible for place to make your own decisions, to put your own puzzle together. And when you do that, you are the master of your own destiny. And I kind of like that. So it's a pretty cool book. So you're gonna sell out on Amazon after this talk. So anyway, so let's just do a little academic understanding, because we're gonna use this framework then to look at Janesville. And so there are the four factors to his framework. And again, the goal of this is to improve the economic performance of place. You can define, we could have arguments of, is really that how we should measure it? You know, GDP of Rock County, of Beloit, average median income, but right, you can do so much more when you have financial resources, right? So anyway, so the most prominent one is the ones that we would think of. Factors of production, right? What natural resources do you have? What factories do you have? What kind of infrastructure do you have? Do you have oil? Do you have seas? You know, look at Chicago. I mean, Lake Michigan, right? Chicago goes to Lake Michigan. And they're so smart. In fact, when they figured out they shouldn't be dumping sewage in the river, and they cleaned it up, I was down there a month ago. Who's been to the Riverwalk in Chicago? It's crazy. It is pumping. It is vibrant at 10 o'clock at night. And that's because of the river. So that's natural, physical resources. We in Wisconsin were known for manufacturing. We had them in Beloit, right? The ironworks, how cool. There are also knowledge resources, and you are a great example of that. Beloit College is a knowledge resource, and you have it, and it creates things. I got to meet one of the students here who's, interning at First National. Our businesses are tapping into you. I know, Brian, you're tapping into wherever you are, Brian Morello, you're tapping into the ingenuity of students here to help solve entrepreneurial issues. Really cool. There's human capital, right? Unskilled, skilled. They call it the company man, right? The old IBM guy, loyal to the company, the white collar worker, and that's a resource. There's also what's really exciting, and I think we're all seeing this, is the rise of the creative class. Someone I follow, Richard Florida, is kind of really the author of this notion, is that some people are really cool to have in your town. And the creative class is one of them. And who do you think's in the creative class? Yeah, he puts them on second tier, but the artists, right? Thinkers. Who else? Lawyers. I mean, they're using their mind, and they're thinking differently about problem solving. So anyway, that's the physical asset. A lot of information on that, and probably your more traditional notion of how you improve place. The second one, which I felt like I was in my business school class, was how firms organize will affect your place. So, and there's a dichotomy here, which I love dichotomies. One of the things I've come to the conclusion is that our strength is our weakness, right? People might say, I'm a little passionate, right, Dave? I like to talk, I'm a doer, but I can also be the Tasmanian devil, right? And so he's saying no comment. Strength is our weakness, the yin and the yang, right? And so this next section really identified that. You can have market power, right? The car industry in Detroit. Market power, GM had market power. But then you can have firms in competitive places. Silicon Valley, think about that. Think of all the competition going on there, right? So what's better? Would you rather be in Bentonville, Arkansas with Walmart? Has anyone been to Bentonville? Anybody like mountain bike? Best mountain biking. And you know why? Because they built trails to attract you there. Walmart's done that. Great eating. Or would you rather be in Silicon Valley with 200, 300, thousands of startups, right? But they each have their pros and cons. Talks about that. They also talk about clusters of economic activity. The idea for us, for instance, with GM plant in Janesville that closed in 2008 or 9, was we started getting clusters around the automobile industry. So one of the companies that spun off was a company called SSI, Dave Baum, that built sensors, right? And he did that because he was around General Motors. SSI then split off into two companies. Dave owns, and his family owns part of it, and the other is owned by a publicly traded company. But that's an example of not only having a cluster of information, but also entrepreneurism. So again, there's these different dichotomies of how firms, and they have implications, right? So the third element is the human element, and it's what's happening here, networking. So last night, we were at annual dinner, 650 people, for an hour and a half. It always amazes me. Door opens at 4:30 for some, 5:30, and people are there on time, other than being a Wisconsin practice of being on time. And people are just networking and connecting, right? And there's real power in that, and that's the human element. In his book, he talks about two great examples. He talks about San Diego. Thank you. It's a great example where San Diego knew that when we were going to start fighting wars differently, that the way the military was going to look was going to impact San Diego. Because who was so strong in San Diego? Navy. And so they started thinking about that, and they formed this Connect. And it brought academic and business people together, right? And researchers to start creating linkages and networks. One of the things that Bowling alone, the famous, and now his name escapes me, from Harvard, Putnam, right, talks about social fabric. These are the elements. One of the examples is Professor Aldrich talks about the Emilia-Romagna region in Italy, where they have outperformed other similar-sized towns in Italy by like 25%. And one of the things they have agreed is how the public and private works together, the network. And these are unwritten codes, right? There's no manual on building community. Well, there wasn't until we got this one. So it's just fascinating. So the last one that really helps drive economic performance, I want to give one other example. We know Silicon Valley, right? And by the way, I attended a lecture a couple weeks ago. The founder of Netscape was speaking. He's involved in so many startups, entrepreneur firms, and he said, COVID, everyone thought they could go away and live somewhere else. Guess what's happening in Silicon Valley? They all want to be back because they know that's where it's happening. So, versus Boston, the route around there has a lot of tech, but they don't network and they don't have the same economic performance. The last point he talks about is policy can have a dramatic impact on what places and how they develop. And the things that it's a great example is Beloit. The city is leaning in and helping create amenities for Beloit to attract young people. So cultural amenities. There are cities now, when you build Boise, Idaho, 2% of the building budget has to go into an art fund because they know that place and cultural amenities work are important. Policy, North Carolina, the research triangle, that was a matter of policy. Last night, we heard from Fred Smith, probably his most passionate advocacy is for free trade. And he said it has been a matter of policy, really, post-World War I, in trying to open up borders, because when goods cross borders, armies seldom do. That's a policy. So, I mean, so you don't need to even hear about me. I mean, it's so rich, this framework. So let's do a quick Janesville case study and apply this and say if you have a multifaceted approach to place and economic development, you will outperform ones that just grab one framework. So Janesville, anyone from Janesville? All right, good. We're famous for Bessie the cow, big cow. You can take your picture, Brent, and that's kind of a joke. We're known for a lot more. So, incorporated in 1836, we are the county seat. We do have a growing population, which is important, right? There are towns that are not. We are the 10th most populous city in Wisconsin, and we're very lucky, and I think this is a matter of policy. We are an MSA. Who knows what an MSA student?
Metropolitan Statistical Area?
Yeah, and why would that be important? Yeah. Okay, listen. It's important because you can get more resources. You're on the radar, right? When you start getting smaller towns. So it helps flag us. And there was actually legislation in Congress 2 years ago that they were going to increase that to, I think, 100,000, and we would have missed it. And we called up Brian Stone like, no. So anyway, so that's a little about us. I am going to play a quick video. So I was Passia, or chair of the chamber. I gotta show you a chamber video.
Forward Janesville is here to ensure the continued health and prosperity of the business community. Janesville has gone through so many changes and redevelopment. The downtown is bustling with innovation and culture. Janesville is a place to meet entrepreneurs. We connect. We capture our dreams. And we are Wisconsin's great outside. We have parks, trails, river, and fun. We partner to pave tomorrow's future, illuminate new opportunities. We connect our families by leaning in on tough jobs. We are helping our kids play and learn, building the workforce of tomorrow, and together moving Janesville forward. We've accomplished so much together. The only question is, what's next?
That's called a sunny chamber video. It's always sunny in Chamberland. So anyway, but it's a pretty cool town, and I was happy to raise my family there. So, all right, we're gonna start applying the framework to Janesville and see, does it make a difference? It's multifaceted. So I've broken it into 4 periods for you. 1854, 1918 is gonna be our first period, and I'll tell you why I chose those dates. I chose them. Now, 1854 is the city year we were incorporated. This is a 1920 map of Janesville. And when you look at this map, what kind of strikes you about it? What do you see? River. And what else?
Just all focused around the river.
Yeah, all focused around the river. What else do you notice? You see what? Grid, yes. Planning, you got it. You see green? That's a park. Park system planned in 1920. So really, if you think about the first 70 years of Janesville, we were building a city. And if I look at the 4-part of the framework, we're gonna buzz through this, but when you think about his first section, resources, we had 3 R's. We had the river, we had railroad, and we had resources in terms of human capital. Tobin's family came from Ireland. James Ryan and Catherine Ryan took a boat, went through Canada, and went until the dirt looked like what they left in Ireland. And they came in the 1860s, right? So we had these important resources. Organization. This, again, is setting us up. We had entrepreneurs back then. There was no GM. we still have a brewery operating now, Gray's Brewery. 1856 it was founded. Best root beer, pretty good beer. But no, it's great beer. I mean, isn't that cool? It was textile, flour mills, lumber. Again, flour mills, because why? Agriculture, great land, we had the river. The Indians knew something when the Ho-Chunk and Potawatomi settled there or take seasons there. We did not have a monopolistic firm. We had an incredible entrepreneur. Who knows about Parker Pen? Oh, good, that warms my heart. Okay, I mean, my handwriting is atrocious because I type everything now, but I still love a good pen. The most important writing device, really, for the 20th century was discovered or invented by George Parker in 1888. He went on to found the Parker Pen Company, and I will argue in the next section that company and with GM had just unbelievable imprint on who Janesville was. We had the Gazette paper in 1843. It was purchased in 1883 by Howard Bliss and kept in the same family until just 5 years ago. The human element, this is really interesting. There's an incredible book called The Good Country, and it's written by an author who studies the Northwest, really 1800 to 1900, and what was the Northwest Territory. And he argues, I think very convincingly, that our region is different because of the human element, the liberal notions of what a good society, what is civic involvement. And that was impacting Janesville all along. Service clubs. Anyone have a relative who's in Rotary, Elk, Moose, some other animal club? Yeah, right? The Elks Club was founded in 1893 in Janesville. We had Lavinia Goodell, born in 1839 in Janesville, was the first woman to argue in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. There was a lot happening. She was very involved in the temperance movement, right? I mean, this is post-Civil War. There's a lot of alcoholism in men. I mean, there's issues, and the women are organizing and saying, how do we take care of society? That was all going on in Janesville. It was going on in the Midwest. And so we really had this notion of it is the community's job to take care of that. Another famous person that epitomizes this notion that I'm a businessman, but I'm responsible for my civil society, was William Tallman. The Tallman House in Janesville is beautiful. It's got a great, great holiday Christmas tree. Go there, it's inexpensive, it's so fun. It's a great Christmas thing to do. He came from Rome, New York in 1850, was a businessman, really smart, but he was also a passionate abolitionist and had Abraham Lincoln stay with him when he was running for office. So that, if you can just feel Janesville growing, by the time if you were walking around downtown Janesville in 1910, it was happening. It was a happening place because of all these different things going on. So the next period, right, 1919 to 1988, and I'll call that the American Dream period that we've read about, we hear about, we study, and it's changed dramatically. The two pictures here are really the icons of what Janesville allowed it to become. And that is, and it's a juxtaposition of General Motors fueled by strong union labor, part of a large, international company, right? That helped put America workforce and ingenuity and manufacturing on the map. And they're building on the line. And on the left is the headquarters of Parker Pen. And they had 75 different flags from around the world in front of their headquarters because they were able to sell all over. And the Parkers, including George's sons, Kenneth Parker, They believed in international trade, they believed about learning about different cultures, and they had a dramatic influence on Janesville. So what are some of the things according to the framework that we should look for? So what are the resources at this point? River, not so important. In fact, I have a funny story about that. It really was what I would call about capital, money, and labor. And then these two organizations that what was good for GM and Parker Penn was good for Janesville. We had Parker High School. The Parkers even built and developed this neighborhood, an ideal neighborhood called Columbus Circle. It's in a circle, it's got beautiful little homes. They were creating workforce development housing before it was workforce development housing. I would say the biggest issue for us was we didn't have a university, and we still talk about that. We're the only one of the top populous cities in Wisconsin that doesn't have a university. We have University of Wisconsin Whitewater UROC, but a 4-year embedded in our city. Organization. What you're starting to see is not just this pure monolithic power. I think everyone thinks of Janesville as a GM town. It wasn't. It was not just a GM town, but it was a GM Parker town. And it makes it so interesting. I gotta tell you, I love our home. It's beautiful. We got a great backyard. 2 doors down is a duplex. And I know the family in there. It's tough making rent. That's on my same street. It's not just some gated community. I think it's that vibrancy of differences that we have and we embrace, all right? So we had entrepreneurs. I told you about Dave Baum. We started getting clusters. We had lab safety. The Hedbergs created that company. That's now part of Granger. So some good things going on. We also started seeing, and this is why I picked 1919, really the advent of public-private partnerships. In 1919, the Chamber paid for John Nolan, you know, Nolan Drive in Madison, just premier architectural and landscape architect, to do our park system in the map you saw. So we were pressing it enough to know that was going to be important. We founded the Chamber in 1919. We did our first search at that time, and now we're pivoting to policy. We voted, led by the women, right, to have a city manager style of government, not a mayor. We're only a handful of cities in Janesville that's run by a city manager, not a mayor. The idea is it takes politics out of the job of running a city, and we did the first school referendum for $1 million built by J.P. Cullen. I mean, they were working hard to take what we had, but to build on it. And proof positive, this is my favorite piece. In 1945, there was a committee called the Citizens of Janesville, and they did this brochure, 1945. And I just have to read this first part to you. This book has been prepared for the information and guidance of industries that are seeking a new home. It provides in brief form the essential information about the city in the country, Janesville, Wisconsin. This city, this is the best part, is interested in adding a small number of new companies, each with a limited number of employees, to its industrial family. This selective attitude is, we believe, important in maintaining a sound natural development of the city. They knew about your framework back then. They weren't gonna let it, and they say, we will not become a boom town. Like I get chills thinking about this, right? Think broadly. My son was an econ major, did PPP, philosophy, political science, economics, and all his friends were in the finance department, wanted to, all get rich, and he always wore his favorite liberal arts t-shirt. It said, study everything, do anything. So you really saw, I think, this part of Janesville, the leaders, the government, the private people, understanding that it was their job to manage the development of the city. So then we have our third period, and that was really 1989 to 2008. And the one I would say, unfortunately, most of the time Janesville is known for, and I call it planning for disruption, waiting for disruption, because we knew what was happening with globalization. We knew that our plant was the oldest in the country. We knew we were ripe for closing, for changing, and we started planning for it. In the pictures, you have the first $1 million high school, Marshall, the Janesville High School. It's now Marshall Apartments. On the right is an image from a book. Amy Goldstein wrote a book, Janesville, The American Story. It's a tough read, guys, because what happened to Janesville when GM plant closed was devastating. We had over 4,000 jobs associated with that plant. The millions, I think $700 million in income, all wrapped up with induced primary economic impact. And it kind of ripped our heart out. But on the left side is that same building, which civic leaders working with the city renovated, converted it into adaptive reuse apartments in an old high school, and turned the auditorium for the high school into a performing arts center today that welcomes 50,000 people in. So you could see kind of waiting for doomsday, but doing something about it. So what did they do? They started really, let me start with human. And again, the chamber at that time realized what was happening, so they reconfigured themselves to be better able to deal with the looming crisis around GM. And they started two funds, the New Century Fund and New Beginnings. They raised a couple $1 million. So they're preparing for the eventual closure of General Motors. At the same time, which is so fascinating, they started recognizing that talent was key, and the chamber started the Leadership Development Academy. I've got some people who've done LDA in here now. It's now Rock County, and we take people from firms, and for 9 months, you're part of a development academy that you learn about building community. It's a great program. We started that then. We renovated the YMCA and joined it with the Boys and Girls Club. We also opened JPAC in 2004. And at the same time, you could see the firms we were just dominated by GM. It weighed over us in a bad way, I think. And that's the thing. If you get stuck on one thing, there's danger in that. The one thing I noticed about resource is you really start to see, I think, more exporting talent than importing, and that's not good. We got great leaders with Parker Penn, international leaders. My husband left, never thought he'd come back. A lot of people were leaving. Tobin's classmate, he graduated in '83, ended up being one of the senior leaders at Toyota. Amazing people, but they went away. So it was a tough period, but you know what? We were doing something. We weren't waiting. I think the problem, though, was we were still hoping for this, maybe it won't close. And in hindsight, you can't. Don't wait for that, just charge forward. The federal economic policy was trying to help us keep the plants open too, and it wasn't enough. So our last period is Janesville, Wisconsin. What's next? And I picked this photo because it really talks about the creative class. 1988, by the way, in the last period, was when Parker Penn sold the company to managers in a management buyout. So you start to see the change of firms. And 2008, because that's when GM plant closed. It was gonna close anyway, so it was a blessing that it finally closed. Who's been to downtown Janesville? Yes, oh my gosh, I love you guys. When I moved there was a parking deck over the river. Do you guys know about this? Brilliant 1974 urban planning. We hear a lot about the death of cities because of highway construction. How about your city, and you think the best thing to do is to put a large concrete parking deck over your river? You didn't even know there was a river. That's what we did, yep. Luckily, it started failing. The DNR made us take it down. But people have been working on downtown development. JPAC is downtown. But this is a symbol of that. So this is Black Hawk. comes full circle, right? Place is about a lot of different people. And that's the miracle. A white buffalo is a sign of a miracle. We had a white buffalo in Janesville. I think we had national news. And this was the first of 20 grand murals now that are in downtown Janesville. And it's art infusion. It's amazing. But it was started by one person, Miller Ryan. Saw this artist, Jeff Enriquez. He's on the East Coast. He's definitely a New Yorker. And she said, I want you to come to Janesville, and I want you to paint Blackhawk, and I know the building that I don't own, but I'm gonna get them to let you paint this. And we literally sat while this was being painted for 3 weeks, and people would bring picnics, we had Indian ceremonies. It was placemaking, creative class at its best. And it's a great symbol of what's going on. So where are we now? And then we'll kind of flip to the conclusions. What's next, as we said in the video? So the resources that have become important for us are multi-generational companies. I can't emphasize how important this is. We have, 10, 15 multi-generations, some that are on 5th generation. J.P. Cullen is a 5th generation company. Rock Roads is a multi-generational company. Blaine's Farm and Fleet, multi-generational company. This is so Prent, multi-generational. They lean in, and they're not huge. Our largest employers are from the public sector, school, healthcare, county. But the next ones are what I call these medium-sized companies, and they're multi-generational. We are also getting better, and this is so important, at becoming part of the Madison region. There's something, I don't know if you know about this, but they talk about competition between Beloit and Janesville. It's ridiculous. We should be embracing each other. I should be excited when you come to Janesville, and you should be excited when I come to Beloit. My gosh, it took me 20 minutes just to get here. Like, you can't get anywhere in 20 minutes in Chicago, right? Like, embrace it. 15,000 people a day leave Rock County to go work in Dane, and 15,000 people in Dane County come to Rock County to work. We've got to embrace that we're part of a bigger ecosystem, and it's going on. And then the other gift that happened was through the GM crisis, our technical college, Blackhawk Tech, stepped up in a big way, and it is an amazing, Dr. Pierner's building a beautiful campus that's serving the workforce needs of our company. So some important things. But again, you have something very different here in Beloit. ABC Supply is instrumental to the development of Beloit, and that's great. There's not a wrong or there's a right, but you should know what's going on. The organization, when GM closed, we started, I'm gonna skip over and kind of try to wrap this up to the third point. What was the neatest thing ever, in a private home, GM closed, industry leaders got together from Beloit and Janesville and said, we're not waiting for government. What are we gonna do about our town? They formed Rock County 5.0, they raised about $1.5 million, and Mary Wilmer and Diane Hendricks chaired it, and they focused on 5 cluster areas. Distribution is clearly one of it, logistics, ag, food, carry, right? Light manufacturing. So they started doing this clusters. And from the human perspective, we realized that we had to do something to attract people. We were losing our talent. People didn't want to move there. So we really focused on renovating downtown. It's been a $30 to $40 million effort. It's not going away. We have been meeting the Arise Now steering public-private since 2016, and every month we have a meeting. It's hard to, but we promise them free lunch and they come. We did capital campaigns. And this is a great example, because in the book, there are people who argue that policy does not have an effect on economic performance. Policy alone doesn't, but policy mixed with the right ingredients does. GM closes. City leaders, private people come together. And what do? They look around and they say, right, what's our asset? It's not the river, remember, that's still closed. No one can see it. I-90. And so they lobbied, there was 3 governors involved in this, but lobbied the state to expand I-90. So how long does it take you to go to Madison now? 40 minutes? Like, if you're going 75, you feel like you're going slow. right? I mean, it's amazing. It was a nightmare, a nightmare. And so they got that passed, $1 billion, and that's policy. We also, through economic policy, recruited SHINE. I mean, we are on the map worldwide for isotopes, for nuclear fusion with North Star and SHINE. Watch that dot or dots. But the city had to give money to SHINE to recruit that. So economic policy, and the city adopted a strategic plan. They had not done that before. And then our biggest project that we did, which was a matter of every single thing in here, was the Women's Center. It's a $50 million project. Who's heard of it? Women's Center? My Janesville folks. $50 million, federal, state, local, not county, and private money to build 140,000 square foot ice arena, multifaceted, multi-purpose, other space, and a convention. And you know where it's going? Where Sears was in our dead mall. I mean, it was a classic example. So a lot of work, all using these things, but this is where I would advocate to you. Reading about this, studying this, I would argue that I would take Professor Odget's framework and flip it. And instead of having 4 parts equal, I believe the most important element for which progress cannot go forward on a sustained manner is the human element. Ferdinand Foch, French commander, he was the supreme Allied commander on the Western Front in World War I, served for over 55 years, brought back really French pride and esteem in the military. Can you imagine overseeing death and destruction in war for 50 years and being as positive to say this, that it's not cannons, it's not bombs, it's not rifles. The most powerful weapon in the world is the human soul on fire. And so I believe that's the essence that will drive placemaking when we embrace that, and when we know that without the other things really can't click, or if they do, but it'll be a matter of time when it goes away. So with that, and so there's my new framework, so I give it to you to consider. I'll buy you a drink. No, is that it's important to know this. And so my question to you, if that's true, then what? We've talked a lot about resources, good policy, the human element, how we organize firms. But if the human element, we, as you said at the beginning, community, right, are the most important things, what should we be doing? So this is this okay? Group participation? Okay? No.
Okay. Thank you, Oakleigh. We're certainly lucky to have you here in Beloit. Janesville is lucky to have you. I think you are someone that is always on fire, always working hard to make your community better. So happy to have you address this question that Oakleigh has raised, or ask any other questions. So yes. Oakleigh is reminding you that you have an incentive to ask the best question.
Yeah. Or ideas. I want to hear, if this is true, what should we be doing?
Great. So I'm going to be walking around with the mic. If you could introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Hi, Oakleigh. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Ojosui, and I'm a senior majoring in economics. And my question is, you've lived in so many different places. So what aspects of traveling, living in different places, have built those insights? What unique experiences has shaped your personal development?
Great question. So there's a wonderful book called Palaces for the People by a sociologist out of New York. And one of the things he talks about was in Chicago, there was an incredible heat wave. Not yesterday, but not in the far distant past. And in the projects, they found that certain people, elderly people, perished more than in others, but same economic socio position. So why, right? And what he discovered was it was the networks of people. So if you were living in a block or a floor where you knew each other, then when this crisis unfolded, right, you reached out to that person. And when people were more alone, they were not, right? And they were at risk health-wise. And so for the question of travel, when you're moving places a lot, and not me, I mean, I'm not walking around as a 3-year-old introducing myself to the neighbors, right? But my parents are. And so what I remember, and we're also in the military, right? And the Army was bringing in, we had officers from Iran, I mean, it was all over, is you just meet people who aren't like you. And it's so important because it shows you the gift of differences, right? And my daughter studied anthropology and finance anthropology, and I think the notion of diversity is not just the physical aspects, but who you are, what makes you up, and that's the beauty of it. And so because we traveled, because we went so many different places, you didn't have an option. If you wanted to know people, if you wanted to get invited over, you had to be nice, you had to meet people, and you learned the beauty of it. And in going back to Palaces for the People, there's social capital, key element, human factor, right? But all social capital is not the same. There's bridging capital and there's bonding capital. Bonding capital is kind of what, Putnam talked about, the bowling leagues, the mooses, the mooses and the elks, they're different, right? Do you join Rotary? Because you bond with each other, okay? And my husband likes to run, so he bonds with fellow runners, right? Bridging capital is when you sit down with people who are very different from you. And so travel, let us see that. Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for your presentation today. My question was in relation to what you said at the beginning. Oh.
Your name?
Yeah, sorry, I dived right into it. My name is Jalen Ponder, and I'm a senior at Beloit, and I'm studying economics. And my question was relating to, in the very beginning, you had mentioned that the people who are in the community, in the place, determine what mold to chase.
Yeah.
And my question is, when Janesville lost the big automotive plant, that impacted the community, and do you believe that the mold that you guys decided to chase was representative of the community needs at that time?
I think, because again, you go back to our development where we don't have a private high school. So you can go to a Catholic school, we have great Montessori, but you all go, if you go to school in Janesville, you go to Craig or Parker, right? So it's a great melting pot, mixing, right? Is because of these civic clubs, right? There's not, and in the 1800s, the Courthouse Hill was the wealthy WASP, and the Irish were in the 4th Ward, right? And we do have that, but there's not bifurcation. And so as the city leaders came together, it wasn't just big business or that. They literally, when GM closed, the city formed a task force, there were political leaders, business leaders, and so some people will argue they're people who, we call them cave dwellers, citizens against virtually everything. Like, you're not gonna win them over, and they show up at city council a lot. But I think it represented the community. But we didn't have an easy answer, and we're still, you remember, it's what's next. I mean, people ask me, what's the brand of Janesville? I don't know yet. We're figuring it out, but we have to listen to everyone. And so when my husband, he played basketball, and he'd come down to Beloit and play basketball in high school, and it was different, right? I mean, Janesville was, 95% Caucasian. Our biggest population is Latinos in our high school, right? And so, the chamber has started Adelante Janesville. And so it's important that we keep doing that. Because if people feel disengaged, they'll check out. And if the community doesn't serve the vast majority of its people, it won't be a prosperous place to live.
Okay, can I ask one quick follow-up question
Yeah.
on what you just said?
No? Yes? Sure. He's going for
Okay,
it.
yeah, okay.
He's going for this.
All right. Yeah, so the people that show up to these meetings, do you think that it's representative of the entire city? My question was more so pertaining when the culture did change. Did the people who are in the community believe that their voice would be heard and they showed up to these meetings, they talked to the leaders and they got it changed? Or do you feel as though the changes are only representative of the people that speak?
No, because a wide variety. A great example to your question is the Women's Center. Oh my gosh, that was a 7-year project. Multiple council meetings. I don't know, and I went through all of them. The longest council meeting was 5 hours. I think we had 50 public comments submitted ahead of time, and then people spoke, completely representative of the gamut. Yeah, older, younger, all different, yeah. But see, and this is a thing, Laura, when we wrap, I have some takeaways on, if this is true, what do we do? But it's not always easy. And so that's an important question to ask.
Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Abhay Gurum. I'm a senior majoring in economics and political science. I know you focused a lot on the human dimension, but my question is related to policy. And given your experience in community development, we saw in the past 4 years glimpses of place-based policy in a lot of legislation that came out in the Inflation Reduction Act, CHIPS and Science Act, America Rescue Plan. How do you see that impacting communities in Janesville and entrepreneurs in Janesville?
Yeah, so you mentioned the CHIPS, right? Act. The issue of policy fundamentally is that if we don't have the human talent to be impacted by it, it doesn't matter what the policy is. And so that's that notion of we say, if you want to, Quint Studer, who has the Deloitte Snappers, very passionate, he says, build a brain, build a life, build a community. And so I think our policies look at dealing with the symptoms, not the root cause. So I'd like to see policies that get at really allowing the flourishing of the human potential, which is a very liberal notion, right? Those are the things that I think are important because policy without that ingredient to work with isn't sustainable or won't work.
Oakleigh, I want to make sure we have time to get back to you. Do you want to take maybe one or?
Yeah, I'll take one more.
One more question?
Yeah, we got one back here.
Thank you, Oakleigh, for your presentation. I loved how you put it together. So my question is, I'm quite curious that towards the end of the presentation, you mentioned one line in your conclusion saying, if I would want to take Professor David's framework, I would flip it. So I'm really curious to know if you could elaborate more on how this flipping or how this reversal of that framework will impact the strategic management of specifically for the city of Janesville.
Right. Great. Well, and flip was, on the left side, you have the kind of the core 3 things of resources, organization of firms, and human factor. And then on the top is policy coming in and weaving, right? And the flipping is moving the human factor to the top. And the policy is one of the frameworks. So if I can't, so Laura, I'll just do this. And then let me wrap with that because that kind of summarizes, if true, the human factor is the most important, then what should we do about it, right? I wrap with this. Do you have a question? You've been so patient.
I do.
Okay. Yeah, is that okay, Laura? And then I'll wrap. It has, I don't know, for you people who have children, I love children books. There's my favorite book. It's if you give a mouse a cookie, then they're gonna ask for a glass of milk, and then they're gonna ask for a napkin, and now if you give a moose a muffin, it's like never ending. This is when you give me a microphone. So, so anyway, go ahead.
I wanted to first thank you for coming out and giving this presentation. I came not knowing what to expect, and I believe I'm gonna leave inspired. Thank you. My name is Frank Hooten. I'm a junior. I'm a business and economics major with a minor in finance. And first I have a response to the quote, and then I have some follow-up questions based on that.
Okay.
So, the most powerful weapon on earth is the human soul on fire. If this is true, then what? The response I thought of was, then burn, light the flame, and ignite the flame of others to follow. That being said, part of the issue with Janesville that you brought up was one that it has a lot of talent, but keeping that talent in Janesville is a big problem, and part of the reason for this is the lack of a four-year accredited university, right? My first question is, what are some of the solutions that you are interested in bringing forth to address this? And the second question was, do you believe connecting Beloit and Janesville is the solution to that problem?
It's one of them. Yeah, I'll answer those, and thank you for trying to think of if yes, then what? And then we'll wrap to your question about, well, what do we do about this as the humans? So what are we doing about not having a four-year university? Well, one, really the state system took care of that when they made all two-year colleges part of a 4 year. So we are University of Wisconsin-Whitewater at Rock County, and there's purple signs leading you. And we have a great Tricia Clausen, associate dean there. The president of Whitewater was at our dinner last night. We had a new CEO. He met with her in 2 weeks. We have a bus that goes between Janesville and Whitewater. We should be getting interns there. We need to engage with our alums. But one of the things we're doing is we have a Janesville Business Hub. And it is a downtown space in One Parker Place, which was, all comes back, which was the original Parker Pen factory on the 6th floor. During the day, we have the Global Business Academy, which is Parker and Craig. There's rivalries between them. Rivalry just exists. You gotta bring people together. And there, they have a business mentor program, and they do, and Brandon Miles was very part of starting that up. They do real world projects, they have mentors, and Whitewater is a sponsor of that. So this year we're talking about bringing professors, right, in there in the afternoon, in the evening, because I've met some of them, they're brilliant. So the flip is, right, we gotta engage. We can't wait for them to show up. I mean, the world is flat. Whitewater's only 30 minutes away, right? And we have a presence. The Beloit, Janesville, absolutely. So one of the things I did, I'm a woman of action, and if you haven't guessed, and so I'm sponsoring Beloit College to be a member of Forward Janesville. Let's, yeah. Here's some advice, just, if you want, just look, whatever a barrier is, just how can I remove that? Don't get all angst about that, just what can I do? It's very important when we talk about in Forward Janesville, if you go to our events, we talk about Rock County, and we try to put our money where our mouth is. We haven't figured as much for Beloit, but Skycarp, they're a member. Nowlin Law Firm is an amazing law firm, offices in both. The LDA serves Rock County. We have to consciously talk about Rock County, because I don't want it to become Beloit, Janesville. What about Edgerton, Evansville, right? Milton. One of the things we did, and we've never done this before, we got the Milton School District to become a member, because we're a chamber and economic development organization as well. And we advocated for both the school referendums for Janesville and Milton. We've never done that before. So we have to put barriers down ourselves. So that's an answer to that. So to wrap things up about, if the human element is really that missing, it's like water for farming. You need it if that seed's gonna grow. The first and most important thing is really defining place, right? It can be your neighborhood, it could be your dorm, it can be your club, but put a boundary around it, call it, right? Recognize it, and it's very important. Alex Tocqueville, Democracy in America, traveled all over America in the 1830s. And he said we had this amazing ability for the civil society to come together, right? And really make their place. And so when you do that, don't bite off more than you can chew. And so if I were the mayor of Chicago, I'm not running, I don't live there, the first thing I would do is I would redefine place for Chicago. And I would make sure every person in Chicago lived in a neighborhood. Break it down, make it bite-sized, right? There are such brilliant people in the big cities. They have all these symposiums. I read their things, I get their stuff. Transform Rockford is a great initiative. It had a pie chart. I think it had 26 outcomes on it. All these folks, I mean, it was just so complicated. Break it down, make it simple. Storytelling, tell stories. Van Wart, we call him, is in the audience, a dear friend, Beloit College graduate. And his parents were from Beloit. He tells story about Beloit College. I know about Beloit College because of Van. Tell stories. Storytelling, the art from the Native Americans. We need to do that. In today's language, it's branding. But if everyone's going to a historic town, it's just the same, right? So think about that. You as youth. We talked about Laura's husband thought he might be, instead of a doctor, in creative graphics and videography. You're creative, you know how to use technology, storytelling. One of the most important things to make sure that we're making progress is I believe every community should have a community dashboard. Quint Suter taught me this, building a vibrant community. He was a speaker at last year's symposium. I worked for him for 20 years. He's a lifelong mentor, a friend of mine. And we just learned in healthcare, like if you're not measuring it, how do you know you're getting results? So in Janesville, our foundation gave a grant to the chamber and we set up a community dashboard. We think it's the first one in the state of Wisconsin. We went to all our partners, the Boys and Girls Club, the schools, the cities, the universities, and said, of the 1 or 2 measurements that you track, what are the most important? And we have it by dimensions. So our DPS scorecard for our schools is on there. We're struggling. Our house price is on there. The number of parks, community dashboard. You can go forward Janesville community dashboard and you'll see it. Education policy. You asked that, like, do people feel that they can come and be heard? Like, you don't want just talking heads when you go to a community event. It's painful, right? You want people who've done their research, who know something, so that you'll listen. So we have to educate people at all stages, lifelong learners. And so civic conversations, that's what universities do so well. For children, I would advocate for going back and understanding what is civic duty in class. I would. Last 2. This is a little geeky business school of me. In the book, there's a professor from Harvard Business School that talks about every place is unique, right? So one of the most seminal works that I read, I still use, and when people ask me to do strategic planning, I make them read it. And it's What is Strategy by Michael Porter, probably one of the most prominent strategists of our time. He's looked at every industry. It's his best work, I think. And Professor Audrick mentions him in his book. And what is strategy? If you remember one thing about that, is operational efficiency effectiveness is not the replacement for strategy. So what does that mean? So Dave works for a company. They're in plastic molding, right? And they have operations all over the world. They are, I know, are very efficient, effective. They run a good organization, but that will not prevent a competitor necessarily from eating their lunch. What will prevent a competitor is taking their different assets and linking them together in a combination that cannot be repeated. And so I would encourage communities to look at their assets and not work on them individually, but do a strategy map and to say, well, how does the river impact that? And I think Janesville. So a strategy map for a community. And he's got some great examples. Southwest was an example. And then finally, we have to, and this is the hardest part of this, is when you say it's our community's responsibility, then it could be no one's. I mean, I don't walk out of a room if I don't have to do something and know who's assigned to what, right? And so that's whose responsibility is it to build talent that can handle curveballs, innovate, motivate. I work on a lot of fundraising campaigns. So does Dave. I'm sure a lot of you as college kids, you have passions. It's hard, it's easier to get money to build a building than to endow a chair sometimes. We could be in a not so great place, but because you have amazing professors like Laura Gruby and Brandon Miles, that will make the difference. We have to let people know that investing in people has the biggest ROI. The Milken Institute, Michael Milken, amazing work there, and he says that social and human capital outperforms real assets on a tenfold basis. So, but how do you get people to believe that and prove that? So those are my thoughts, and thank you so much. This has been so much fun.